Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 538 through 540, which will cover manga chapters 619 through 622. And this is the part from this Fishman Island arc where I am most excited to talk about, where we get to dive into the stories of Fishman Island's two most iconic heroes. Alright, so synopsis. After Hody gets bested by Zoro with one shot, thanks to the energy steroid, Hody recovers and takes the king hostage, as well as the remaining Straw Hats as well. Meanwhile, in the Sea Forest, a few of the Straw Hats reconvene and meet up with Jinbe, who begins to explain the troubled history of Fishman Island and the legends of its two greatest people, Queen Otohime and Fisher Tiger. Alright, so differences. There are actually quite a few differences in this section. There's an extra bit of tension added to the scene where Zoro is trying to get back above water after cutting Hody, where he's attacked by several of Hody's henchmen, which doesn't happen in the manga. He just immediately resurfaces in the manga, so this is more so just to add some time and to pad out the runtime. Also, another change is that whole conversation of the princess discussing what to do next and then getting summoned to the water wheel town, as well as Icarus watching them leave and having his little evil monologue, was all added filler in the anime. In the manga, it goes from Neptune and the Straw Hats being captured to then Luffy, Shirahoshi, and Megalo arriving at the Sea Forest. Another added scene in the anime shows Robin finding the poneglyph, which obviously isn't shown in the manga. There's also an added scene of Caribou kidnapping another mermaid when he's kind of hiding behind that house in Coral Hill after witnessing Shirahoshi. There's a couple small changes during the whole Fumiya sequence. First off, we don't actually get to see Otohime's face until the flashback, but we do see her face for the first time on one of the Fumiya portraits that the new Fishman pirates are using. And then, additionally, along that same stretch of scenes, we actually see Zeo's camouflage ability here. This is actually revealed to us a little bit earlier than it is in the manga, which happens a few scenes later. Another change I thought was interesting, since it seems a little strange, even kind of a slight characterization issue, as in the manga, the way Luffy gets his tea is different. So in the manga, Nami gives it to Luffy. However, in the anime, Luffy just kind of like straight up picks it up off the ground after Nami declines it from Sanji. I don't know, I just like the idea that Nami like knows Luffy well enough to just like hand him the tea. So it's a really small, minor change, but it just kind of, I don't know. It's always the little things that add to sort of the character dynamics and each character's sort of personality. Another weird change is that in the anime, they have Den talk about the dark times during the Great Age of Piracy on Fishman Island, except in the manga, it was Hachi who mentions this. I think it's a lot more impactful that Hachi says this, because Den, he's not really that significant of a character. He's just kind of there to help coat their ship again, and also to give a little bit of characterization for Frankie. But it just, I don't know, he doesn't feel significant enough to be the one to talk about this, and I like the fact that it was Hachi in the manga. And then in the anime at the end of episode 539, we get this kind of silhouetted shot of the Sun Pirates, but the manga actually goes a step further, and at the end of chapter 620, actually has a brief scene that takes place somewhere kind of in the middle of the flashback, just to show a brief snippet of what the Sun Pirates are actually look like. And that's really our proper intro to Fisher Tiger, and this is where we get a the money shot of the crew, as well as Fisher Tiger himself clearly in view, with his title card as well. So yeah, we don't get any of that in the anime. There are a couple things added, especially in the final episode of the trio, as during the flashback, it comes back to the present, which never happens in the manga. It always stays in the past. And so this is something that happens a lot in the anime, where they constantly flash back to the present to get reactions from people, which is useless. I'd rather just have the whole story told out in one go, but obviously I know why they do this, to pad out more time. The anime actually shows what the thief Papanil did with his hostage when slapped by Otohime. So he throws her aside, and she's actually caught by the Minister of the Right. And I actually like this addition, because in the manga, it's not clear what happened to the hostage. He just kind of gets slapped, and then she disappears. You never actually see her again. So I like that change in the anime. That was a good one. There's also an added scene of Jinbe confronting the human pirates in the bar during the flashback. I don't know. This one I'm pretty neutral on. It doesn't necessarily hinder nor add anything. And then finally, the anime actually shows Jinbe, Arlong, and Hachi all getting their sun tattoos, which I thought was a really cool scene that they added. And this is another one that I actually did appreciate them adding. See, these are the things that I like when they add, like actual real things, not just pointless scenes that add and pad out time. Okay, so with all those differences out of the way, let's get into my thoughts on these episodes. So this set of episodes kicks off with a bang as Zoro makes his way back after defeating Hody. Then Neptune, to create an escape, he blasts a giant water Kamehameha called the Ultramarine. This move, he grabs the water similar to how Jinbei does when he uses his Fishman karate, his Mizugokoro. And the Ammonites as well as the ministers are able to escape, but Neptune and the three Straw Hats are stranded as Neptune's strained back is preventing him from moving, which I can relate to all too well as of recently, last year, I severed a herniated disc, so I know exactly how it feels to have your back completely useless. Even with Hoe's help, they're unable to escape as Hody regains his strength thanks to another energy steroid and holds them in place. And as silly as Neptune is, he is an incredibly honorable man as he doesn't abandon the Straw Hats and opts to let himself get captured as well. One thing that's kind of confusing about this scene when you look at the manga and the anime version is in the shot of Hody, like hanging on to Neptune's tail, the trident he's holding are different for some reason. In the anime, he's picked up his original red trident, but in the manga, he's clearly taken Neptune's more ornate trident, which kind of adds a bit more insult to injury in the manga, where Hody, defeating Neptune, takes his trident and actually uses that. It's not really a big deal or anything, but I just thought it was a really interesting change. I'm almost wondering if this was maybe an oversight on Toei's part, or maybe Neptune's trident, because of how much more intricate it is, it became too much of a pain in the ass to animate, so they opted to use the more plain-looking red one. And so they had him hold that because, yeah, it doesn't really add anything. It's not like he takes the trident and uses it later on. But I just thought it was a really weird change that they had him pick up his other trident when in the manga he's clearly holding the other one. I also can't get over the joke of how Hody's henchmen think Brook is a decomposed body just kind of floating around in water. And then in the next real scene, we get Luffy and them arriving at the sea forest. And one thing I want to point out as sort of a translator's note, even though if you're not fluent in Japanese, you can probably hear it, is how Luffy refers to and introduces Shirahoshi. In the subtitles, he refers to her as coward. And on its own, it makes sense. But in Japanese, he uses the word yowamushi, which literally translates to weak bug. But in actuality means coward, or more accurately, like a weakling. But Luffy chooses this specific word because yowamushi sounds an awful like Shirahoshi. And you'll see this evolve later when Luffy and her relationship begins to deepen a little bit. He does alter what he calls her. Then all sorts of reunions happen as Luffy's finally reunited with Jinbe, which is really sweet. But I crack up every time Shirahoshi greets Jinbe, and he starts to speak all casually, and then midway through realizes he's seeing Shirahoshi outside the castle and freaks the hell out. that change is so funny, especially coming from such a intimidating character. But I like that Jinbe is already starting to become more cartoonish now that he's hanging more and more around Luffy. And then follow that up with his shock to see Hachi not in prison along with Arlong, Chu, and Kurobi. And it's at this point Chopper and the rest of us, the viewers, are all relieved that Sanji has returned to his normal levels of annoying perviness, and the nose bleeding has stopped, thank God. And that's really not much of an issue later on, so kudos to that. There's also this funny exchange between Frankie and Luffy where he gets all angry about Den being on the Sunny, not knowing who he is, and Frankie comes over to explain that he is his master Tom's brother who's helping him recoat the ship. And Luffy, unable to process that many words at the same time, interprets it as, and he interprets it confidently, I might add, as, so he's a shipwright master who's coating Frankie's brother. To which, after a long pause of silence, Frankie just kind of goes with it, knowing his captain, and replies, yeah, something like that. Now, here is where we get to the meat of Fishman Island, and arguably the best portion of the entire arc, when Nami arrives at the sea forest. Jinbe takes this opportunity to thank them for stopping Arlong, but at the same time reveals and apologizes for being the one to set Arlong loose on the East Blue. Now, this is something we had sort of known from the very beginning with Yosaku's little lesson on the Shichibukai all the way back just after the Baratie arc, which something Sanji actually recalls a little later on. Of course, Luffy barely remembers it, but casually wonders if Yosaku is doing well, which I find also pretty sweet. Now, it's a pretty well-known fact, but just in case some people don't know, when Oda wrote that part of Yosaku referencing Jinbe, he had originally planned for Jinbe to, in fact, be an antagonist who had a design that resembled a umibozu fishman and had more of a mafia boss type personality that basically controlled Arlong from the shadows, which was all revealed in the Vivarokar data books much, much later on. And since he had originally written Jinbe with the seeds of that concept, he now kind of had the difficult task of still making that fact make sense, but maintaining Jinbe's now good-natured and honorable personality. And I have to say, I think he did a pretty good job of it, and it still makes sense, albeit a little clunky. We will see how this plays out in the flashback and how we sort of see that evolution of Jinbe. Sanji, back to his normal self, brings tea to everyone, but I always wondered about this scene is, do the Straw Hats just have a giant-sized teacup available on the Sunny for these purposes? Like, where did he get a cup that's perfectly sized for Shirahoshi? Like, it's so big. Where would they even keep something like that? But yeah, that's something that's always kind of cartoon logic, I guess you can say. Nami also telling Sanji to cut it out after his level of silliness cutting the tension was also pretty funny, but also sobering seeing just how serious Nami is, because she doesn't do it in an exaggerated or comedic way like she normally does. She says it with this incredibly serious and quiet demeanor. And Sanji does get serious, and because of his deep devotion to the ladies and the crew, and especially Nami, he basically threatens Jinbe that he will give him a chance to explain himself, but if that answer isn't satisfactory, he will kill him. And this is where I think Oda's writing and One Piece as a whole really excels at deepening the story and rewards its readers and viewers, because if you stick with the series, it not only recontextualizes some aspects and or deepens the characters and stories so much, it makes you realize that everything isn't black and white, good or bad, that there are many layers and nuances to all of this. Like, it makes you think about the world and yourself, but presents it in a more understandable way, in a more whimsical way that allows even younger audiences to kind of grasp it a little bit easier, which I love about all of this. Because this flashback and this arc's themes really do deal with a lot of heavy things and kind of complicated things as well. Like, yeah, it's true. Not all of this is black and white, and you know, everyone, even Arlong, his actions may be pure evil, but his sort of reasoning and motivations are a little gray. Like, you can kind of understand why he's like the way he is, even though you can't really condone the way he expresses himself. Another thing I like that kind of adds to this moment is in the recap of Nami's time under Arlong's control, we do get to see many scenes we're all very familiar with, but we also get a few more scenes we've never seen, just adding more fuel to how horrific and harrowing Nami's childhood really was, putting her life on the line every day to collect the money to save her village. And you see more scenes of her actually struggling with that, and just how life or death those situations were. But instead of Nami just being all vindictive or angry or even sad about it, Oda shows Nami's depth as a person, as while directly it says that she has no sympathy for Arlong, what she witnessed on Sabodi 2 years ago made her view things in a completely different light. That these fearsome and absurdly strong fishermen were actually the weak ones being oppressed. And by having Nami directly experience this, it helps to spell it out for the younger readers too, who may still have a harder time really understanding the nuance of all this, which is also really great because we are getting into, again, like I said, heavy stuff. And it really helps that one of the main characters kind of spells this out for us. And again, I want to reiterate the thing I really love about this reveal, and it was hinted at in the Hachi's cover story, was how he and the rest of the Arlong pirate crew all idolized the surface world, and especially Sabodi Park. And Nami immediately realized that Arlong Park was built in the image of Sabodi Park, And I mentioned this in the review of the live action show, but I love that because of the benefit of hindsight, the Netflix live action took the time to lean into this idea even more by making it look more like a theme park with this sort of the festive lighting and the additional carnival games and just sort of all the stuff that they use to line the main area of the entrance to Arlong Park. And this really makes you think about a lot of different things. Arlong did terrible things, but it forces you to think more about everything in more nuanced ways. You see the child version of Arlong all happy and excited to just even see Sabodi Park. And you think about what happened to that kid to turn him into the monster you see that would become a hateful person that hates humans so much to the point he would do all those terrible things. I think there is a part of us all that back in the Arlong Park arc, some of us were even guilty of that same line of thinking that the humans within the story have had, since we only saw a tiny slice of fishmen, that we all assumed that they were all dangerous and scary pirates. And when we get to Sabodi and Fishman Island, we learn that most fishmen are good people, and even the bad ones like Hachi would have not been terrible had they not been forced to do so because of humans. Like, what Hachi and Arlong did was evil and reprehensible, no doubt, but you can't deny the fact that perhaps there is a world in which Arlong would have grown up to be a decent person. Like, we certainly know that Hachi most certainly would have, just given his nature, but there might also be a world in which Arlong grew up to be a good person as well, had the world not basically pounded all that hate into his mind. Jinbe then begins to explain two very important figures in the history of Fishman Island, but also the world of One Piece. Those being two names we keep hearing throughout the story, and that's Queen Otohime and Fisher Tiger. Jinbe also goes on to reveal the true meaning of the sun tattoo that we've seen on so many prominent fishmen, including the Arlong Pirates and Jinbe himself. They were all once part of the same pirate crew, the Sun Pirates. Now, the symbology of the sun has been a very prevalent thing in the story of One Piece, and I don't know what you've been doing if you haven't seen it. But we've seen several mentions of a sun god worship in Skypiea, the fact that the first chapter of the series and the start of the New World portion were both titled Romance Dawn as well as New Romance Dawn. And the Straw Hat's ship is called the Thousand Sunny. Most recently, we got the Sun Tree Eve. There are so many more tiny references to the sun or the dawn laced throughout the series, basically symbolizing the goal is for the dawn of a new era where all people can live freely under the sun. Now, definitely keep an eye out for all the sun and dawn references because they basically never stop, as it's seemingly a huge concept based on how much it appears in the story up till this point. And I can tell you, kind of going forward, it's pretty important as well. Now, for Fisher Tiger, we've heard that name before as Luffy tries his hardest to remember, but we all remember, right? Like, he was first mentioned back on Amazon Lily by Hancock when Luffy had accidentally seen her celestial dragon slave mark. He was the one that freed the slaves from Marijua, including Hancock and her sisters. Otohime is a character we've only just recently been introduced to, and we saw her face for the first time earlier in those pictures that the new Fishman pirates were forcing people to step on. One thing about this moment is that Oda is drawing on real historical events regarding the fumie or stepping on a picture practice. So fumi is to step or step on in Japanese, and is picture. And so when you put those together, fumie is just picture stepping or stepping on a picture. And it comes from Japan's own history of persecuting Christians in Japan during the Edo period, where suspected Christians were forced to step on tablets that had images of Jesus or Mary, and has since kind of become a twisted test of loyalty. And if they refused, they would have been tortured or potentially even executed. And with this context in mind, it really paints just how extremist Hody and the new Fishman pirates are becoming, even when compared to Arlong and his crew. And this is obviously not the only Christian reference in this arc, as we've already seen a literal Noah's Ark and the Eve Tree. Oda really likes to infuse his stories, as we know, with real-world culture, real-world history, real-world events, and real-world people, as well as all influences. And while this arc is full of more Christian references, we've seen many other religions also referenced and will be referenced in the future. And I love that one aspect of Oda not just drawing on one particular religion or culture. He draws from everything and kind of like mishmashes them together, which keeps you kind of guessing, because obviously if you if he starts to just focus on one particular culture or religion, it can kind of get a little predictable because we can see where it's going because he's drawing from one particular source. But I like the fact that he mixes and matches a little bit to keep us on our toes, that we can't really quite see exactly where he's going. With these two important figures set up, Jinbe launches into one of, in my opinion, the most tragic flashbacks in this series, and that's saying something. I do think there are a handful more tragic ones, but this one always gets to me particularly. This is also a flashback that's particularly dense with a great deal of information, lore, setup, characters, real-world parallels, references, and callbacks, and it has all of that and so much more. It's one of my favorites and easily the best part of this entire arc. Now, since we already have been somewhat made familiar of who Fisher Tiger is, the flashback more or less starts on the introduction of Queen Otohime finally, and she is something. Like, she is an incredible woman. Her name comes from the Japanese goddess Otohime, who is said to be the daughter of Ryujin, the Japanese god of the sea, which makes sense. We see right off the bat her strong sense of doing what's right and wrong despite her royal status. She's not afraid to get in the thick of things by confronting a thief and even smacking him upside the face, not unlike another female royal we've come across thus far in Princess Vivi. And this is in stark contrast to the celestial dragons, who have slaves and servants basically do everything for them and don't take any responsibility for anything. And that becomes an important fact later on, so keep that in mind. Otohime is such a strong yet kind character. She has an incredibly strong moral compass, but such an insane compassion and empathy, which we learn is either due to her especially strong observation haki, or perhaps I think it's the other way around. Her incredible empathy and compassion is what gives her her strong observation haki, similar to how strong-willed people have stronger conqueror's haki. And this is something that's we've seen with Kobe and his insane observation haki, where they both are overwhelmed by their observation haki's ability to feel others' thoughts and emotions to the point where they themselves start to feel them as well. Also, it's this incredibly strong observation haki that allows her to dodge the bullets from the thief whose name is Papanil when confronting him earlier. Otohime is firm when you do something wrong, but recognizes why people can maybe be in a position to be forced to do something like that, like why the thief was forced to steal, and even takes responsibility for her own failures as a ruler. And this scene is played for laughs as she goes from good cop to bad cop on a dime, from crying for him then to slapping the hell out of him. But it's because of her unbiased fairness why she's so beloved. And although I do think slapping the kid for having a runny nose was a bit overboard, but Otohime is seen leading the charge in trying to improve fishermen and human relations, trying to change the perceptions of the fishermen that not all humans are bad people and to be feared. And I think what I love so much about Otohime is how, despite her insurmountable task of convincing everyone that humans and fishmen can coexist together, and how many times she gets knocked down, but no matter how devastating the setbacks she encounters, she's always able to stay positive, dreaming of a better future for her people, and especially the children of the future. But we do see that she can get down, but she always pulls herself back up and pushes on. She also is someone that leads by example and isn't afraid to put herself in danger to do what's right for the people. And I can't tell you how much I admire Otohime. And by the end of this flashback, your love for Otohime will rival that of the characters in the story too. I guarantee it. You cannot leave this flashback and not love Otohime and what she stood for. Like, she is such an awesome character. Also, as a side note, Otohime is seen as being especially delicate and fragile, as she even just fractures her arm just slapping the thief. And this may be in part due to the fact that she is a goldfish fishman, or fishwoman. Goldfish are often known for being very delicate, a kind of a fish who are very prone to many health complications and need to be cared for in very specific ways if you don't want to kill them. So I like that Oda kind of played into that with her character. Moving on, in this flashback, Jinbe and Arlong are seen as having a more contentious relationship than we were led to believe at the start of the series, which is another thing that the live action actually corrects a bit during that scene where Nezumi and Arlong are negotiating, and when Jinbe is brought up, Arlong is seen enraged and snaps at the mention of Jinbe. Arlong, for his part, has always been quite a bit of a punk and a human hater, going so far as to try and sabotage Otohime's attempts to get Fishman to sign her petition and agree to go to the surface world. The younger Jinbe is also fairly different as he's far more apathetic to everything. It seems like he seems far less passionate or present than his present day counterpart, and he doesn't seem to agree with what Arlong is doing, but at the same time only intervenes when one of the Ammonites asks him to. Arlong still seems to respect Jinbe a bit, even if it is more so out of a respect for your elder brother type of obligated respect. However, both of them genuinely respect the man and legend himself, Fisher Tiger, as we finally get to see him fully in the anime. When you meet him, it really does seem like Fisher Tiger is like the father of the Fishman pirates and fishmen alike. And Arlong and Jinbe are almost bickering like brothers in front of him, vying for his attention and approval. And from a design standpoint, what stands out is just how much larger he is when compared to both Jinbe and Arlong, who are both massive in and of themselves. And he towers over both of them by a good like 2 or 3 feet, which is huge. Fisher Tiger is what's called a sea brim fish that are kind of seafloor foraging carnivores. And another interesting fact, or not so fun fact, depending on how you look at it, is that in Chinese folklore, the tiger is seen as the dragon's fiercest enemy, which is very appropriate considering Fisher Tiger dedicates much of the rest of his life to fighting the celestial dragons and their slavery practice. The next scene where he meets with Neptune and Otohime is a pretty chilling one, as he makes it clear to them that he's going back out to sea, but this time with the sole purpose of freeing the slaves, and this is the event that leads into Hancock being saved. Neptune asks him what he saw, but by this point it's pretty clear what he saw based on his facial expressions and Otohime's reaction via her strong observation haki. We don't find out explicitly from him till a little bit later on in the flashback, but I'm going to mention it here because it's heavily implied and most of us can figure it out that, and I figured it out at this moment too, that he himself was taken as a slave at one point. And at the time when Hancock mentioned this, even then I figured that this man didn't free the slaves out of the goodness of his own heart, that he himself must have been a slave and decided to break out but didn't want to leave anyone else behind, which he eventually goes back to free them, just as Hancock had said. And the fact that you can infer all this without it actually being spelled out, though, is pretty incredible in Oda's writing and drawings, because it's palpable from him being all happy and welcoming and even messing around with Arlong and Jinbe, to the next shot, a close-up of his face with this sort of traumatized yet determined look on it. That moment is when you basically figure it out. At least that's what I did. With the news of Fisher Tiger attacking the Celestial Dragons and freeing the slaves, Jinbe quits his post as the Ammonite and joins Tiger's newly formed Sun Pirates. And this attack also emboldens Arlong in his hate for humans, even though that's not why Tiger attacked. He decides to fold the Arlong Pirates into the Sun Pirates, thus we get to see how they all get those prominent sun tattoos. I, for the life of me, never understand why Hachi decided to do it to his face, of all places. Like, it looks like it hurts so bad. It's basically a brand more than a tattoo, and he does it to his face. I think Oda did that from a design perspective earlier on and didn't realize like how that tattoo got there. But I still find it a little funny that he decided just to put this hot brand on his forehead. But yeah, thus the Sun Pirates are born, and unfortunately this is where these episodes end, but we will continue the flashback in the next couple of podcasts, as this is, like I mentioned, an incredibly long and densely packed flashback, which I am very much looking forward to going over with all of you. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGoPodcast, or I guess X account at SunnyGoPodcast, for updates when I post new episodes. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. I'm going to have like a small little comment in the spoiler section. It's not really going to be anything. It's just kind of something I wanted to point out going forward. But if you're not interested in that, thanks for listening. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Okay, so spoiler section. So this section, I kind of wanted to talk about how we see Sanji get incredibly angry with Jinbe, as obviously he's very protective of Nami, and knowing what happened to her and what she had to go through. And so, of course, Jinbe potentially being the person that's responsible for all of that really angers Sanji. But one thing that really, and this is something more that you might want to that you kind of pay attention to after going back. Like if you go back and rewatch from this point on till basically now, you kind of see this like weird, I don't know, this. It's not like Sanji hates Jinbe, but he's always a little bit more meaner to him for some reason. Like obviously he's most sort of mean to Zoro because of their sort of rivalry, but he's always like kind of picking on Jinbe a little bit. And you see it happen every so often anytime they're together. And it's very strange. Like almost like he just never forgives Jinbe. And I don't quite know if it's like just that he's never forgiven Jinbe, or maybe he has something against Fishman, which I would think is very strange considering, the role that the Strong Hats play in trying to increase Fishman and human relations. But I always find it really strange. Like, yeah, if you pay attention, just from here on out, you just see Sanji always kind of like these snide remarks or just like little things where he just seems like he doesn't like Jinbe or he doesn't like him as much. And he just kind of like picks on him a little bit. But yeah, keep an eye out for those moments. It's interesting. I'll point them out throughout the podcast in the non-spoiler sections when we get to those moments. But yeah, if you've already read through the entire story, and you go back and either reread or rewatch any of the episodes going forward, it's very interesting to see Sanji's attitude towards Jinbe sometimes. And they're very like small moments too. They're not like huge moments. You just kind of like, they're just like snide remarks or just weird comments or just the way he reacts to Jinbe is very interesting. But anyways, that's kind of all I wanted to mention in the spoiler section. Thanks for listening and see you on the next episode.